Hey guys, BBT Vanessa here. Before we get into today's video, we're going to go ahead and get a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll dig right into it.
Decentralization is one of the most important factors in a global cryptocurrency network. Bitcoin's proof of work functions due to the exceptional security provided by the miners of the network. Today's sponsor is Compass Mining, a company with a customer-focused experience providing a tailored approach to purchasing, hosting, or even an at-home option, allowing anyone the opportunity to participate. If this interests you, head over to compassmining.io.
See how good the Google Pixel 6 is. Capture.
So what's the topic today?
I don't know. Carter, are you going to talk?
Yeah.
We can deep dive.
I mean, there's a lot of movement right now.
Yeah.
I'll let the group decide what they want to hear about.
Yeah, I was trying to look around and see. I mean, everybody here is kind of already in the space. You know, not everyone's already got miners set up, but.
Well, my mom's not. She's brand new. She's
No, absolutely nothing.
She's got some Ethereum on PayPal right now.
Yeah, there you
Some
go.
money with Ethereum. I'm like, okay, I gotta learn about this.
I was holding some Kylan, and I just saw that they're doing an airdrop. I was pretty excited about that. Kusama. I guess they're launching an parachain on Kusama. And they had a native token for that.
And that's their distribution, yeah.
Yeah.
The airdrops, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot of questions on the videos about like, what's the difference and why would somebody airdrop and stuff. And at the end of the day, it comes down to that's a distribution line. And that's, I don't call it SEC protection, but like if you're going to issue a token, your first concern is, am I issuing a security?
Right.
And if you're in the US, that's yes. Like if you're creating it and just issuing it, it's security. So there's a way to buy an airdrop is saying it's worth nothing and we're just giving folks something. And then it creates price discovery, which is like what Uniswap did, you know, for theirs, for being the router, as it were, from the DeFi side. They were like, not gonna risk it, gonna just drop it, and then we'll catch it back in fees. So they built the code, they airdrop all the tokens, and then if you use those tokens for the function that they do, then they just get their money back through a fee structure, right? So liquidity providers get some of it, developers get some of it.
Are they in a little hot water, Uniswap, right now?
Well, kind of, because they did not register some of their activities the way they do, like the payouts, and there's it's a gray space right now. So I mean, SEC can go after them, but they can also claim safe harbor. So I mean, that's what they're all going to do. Is everybody can claim safe harbor on it, saying, hey, the safe harbor gives them the ability to innovate in a gray area, and then they just have to prove like, hey, you know, we're trying to innovate. Yes, it's in this gray area, but I mean, I think they'll come out of it fine. The same thing is probably going to be with XRP, so they'll be able to call it too. And I'm not an XRP fan or anything, but I think that they're going to be fine legally, because it's just.
That should be good for XRP holders, though.
For holders, yeah. And it all comes back down to tie to utility in some way for those things that claim to be utility, right? It's like, what is it doing?
I read somewhere that a lot of CBSDs or central bank didn't occur. A lot of there's some governments were going to try to use Ripple technology to launch their.
Well, yeah. So there's some that have looked at Ripple as a replacement for Swift, and then you've had the ones that have looked, like China has looked. I know our government's looking. The funny thing about all of it is even if you centralize it, the participants that will use that centralized token, it is a chain and it is transparent even with those folks in there. So you can't have any kind of manipulation in it without causing an issue on the nodes. So the reason why China hasn't released it, even though they're the centralized entity, is because if they try to manipulate the currency, all the node holders that are participants that receive that central currency would be like, wait a minute, no, that doesn't match my node. Like, what are you doing? So again, it comes down to the technology ends up being, the baseline. So you cannot go and then just update a record. It's all a pin. I mean, to simplify all that. That's what all this technology in general provides from this, is the fact that you have updates are done as a new record that's referring to something that happened. So where they're like, oh, blockchains don't solve anything that traditional databases wouldn't. Well, the difference is in traditional database, even in an asset database that's supposed to be hashed and all that, I could restore a backup to a new change that has all new hashes. And then like, hey, everybody restore this backup. So I did make changes to that record, kind of in an offline state, and then just restored it, right? And then everybody restored it. You can't do that in blockchain. You'd have to have all the nodes to agree to restore this new history. So you always have to refer even garbage in that, oh, that was wrong, and here's the accrual, and now it all reconciles. Well, in a central bank, if they were doing that, even if they made mistakes or they wanted to change something, there would be a record of it. Who did it? Why did it happen? So it's when they start reconciling the stuff that makes business work, and this is for everything. Like sometimes the framework doesn't fit the situation. So even just normal business transactions, sometimes it's like, well, we'll just cover it to this, and then we'll update it here, and we'll make a note. Or you'll change the original record to reflect the reality of what happened, but you lose that history now. So in crypto and that sort of thing, you're just going to have to, the business behavior changes where everything is recorded, and now you're making all your changes that refer to that event. It helps change behavior, right? I mean, if there was something nefarious going on, they're just going to have to stop doing that. Or
find another way
be exposed or something. So yeah, until they get through the understanding, acknowledgement that that's going to be the way that you have to do it, then you'll start to see central bank coins in some way, even if they're stable, right? They're still going to have to reconcile. Just because it's third-party participants are going to be part of it, because they're going to want to accept them. So like the PayPals and everybody else are all going to run a node, and the whole point of holding the node is also knowing where the pipe is, so you know, okay, I have the latest version of the traditional database that is, do I have the latest sync? Is it asynchronous or synchronous? In blockchains, it is, am I the latest block height, which means I have the latest sets of transactions. And then everybody make sure everybody's on the same history of stuff. So then if you get, a reference, if you have a more complex blockchain or something like Solana or Polkadot, where you'll start getting, if you don't know where your height is at, then you're going to start getting updates before the creates type of thing. So when I go to create a transaction, I'm now referring to update that transaction. That's not linked, so it has to know where the height is. So like to have participants be able to exchange value, they got to know where they're at now. And blockchain seamlessly does that. It answers a big issue with traditional database stuff. So too. But it doesn't have to be the owner of all things. It could just be your record keep. I mean, there was a really good, you covered NFTs last week.
A couple weeks ago.
There was a really good example I like on the NFT side where it's like fungible versus non-fungible, where they're like, it's like your non-fungible is like your deed of your house. It's like all your houses are different, so right, you can't exchange that. And you can use that framework to understand the value in some of these chains that are providing utility, they just need to be the record. The database, the pictures, all the other stuff, the PDFs, the chain of custody stuff, all that could be still in databases.
It's all just a reference.
Everywhere, but your chain of custody is on the chain.
And I think I covered that as part of my special where I mentioned the fungible versus non-fungible from Bitcoin, and you can't tell the difference between two of them or where they've been spent. Like for instance, the apes we were talking about, you can clearly tell the difference between the two.
So were you in here doing the NFT?
I did an NFT presentation a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
Do you think you'll do one of those in the future?
Potentially. It depends on how everything lays out, but it's possible.
Cool.
What was the second point of that we were just talking about? I totally lost it.
Yeah, just the
non-fungible versus fungible.
The chain of custody pieces.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people don't really recognize this as an NFT or any token, that what you're really purchasing is a database entry, exactly like what you're discussing.
Yeah.
You're purchasing a reference point that's non-fungible and
Right.
it's immutable. It's a public immutable ledger, like you said. You can't go back and change it. It's
So
in
it's
there
not
forever.
so much the JPEG itself.
Not at all. There's people out there. I posted on Twitter yesterday a picture of my mutant ape, and 5 people shared it and said, "This is mine now." And I said, "Congrats on your newfound wealth." But
Right.
if one of us wants to go sell it for 25 G's,
On contrary.
good luck with it. And
Yeah.
I have access to the blockchain ledger entry that says it's mine. And that's realistically the difference between me holding that picture and you holding that picture. So.
Yep.
Yeah, it's we've had quite a few questions, especially on the channel when we're doing stuff like asking, I still don't understand NFTs, why does it have value? And it all comes back down to, if you know, because it's produced through a signature, that an artist or somebody that you follow, that you care deeply about, that you want something of theirs, now you have an empirical record that says, hey, this is my self-signed ID to this thing, and now you have this history that occurred. Mm-hmm. More so than a centralized authority saying you do, or go back to like baseball card collections and Beckett's and all this thing, and there's only so many of these. Well, I don't know if that actual print was a reprint. I have a friend that collects Magic cards at like a scale that rivals some Bitcoin wallets, right? Like, it's insane. Like, he tries to get all these things, but it's like they're at that level of making sure that it's not a replica. Like, is it?
And if it gets stolen too.
Correct. You don't know, and having that, being able to tie that now to something digital, you have this attraction to the just what's fact and what's not type of thing, and you can digitally sign to that fact, and that's the first thing that you have on it. And then to your point of like somebody copying your picture and stuff, it's the same if you think like a house deed that's been manifested now. That deed is the house. Somebody can come take a picture and post it up.
Doesn't matter.
They don't have the deed to the house.
People
right?
always say, one of my favorites to help people understand who don't understand non-fungible tokens and devaluing an image.
Mm-hmm.
You've all seen a million prints of Van Gogh's Starry Night or of the Mona Lisa, but it did nothing to devalue the original work. If anything, it just brought awareness to the value of the original work, and that's kind of the same idea. You're basically, go ahead and advertise my ape. Cool. Like, go ahead. It's been 20 years. If I want to sell it, it's just more people have seen it. You know what I mean? And then I think a lot of people need to recognize, kind of to follow up what you were saying, that digital signature is signed by you, showing that you own it, you purchased it with your consent, and that the artist sold it to you with their consent under their specific signature, policy ID, smart contract address, whatever it be, or that the current owner of it did. And the chain of custody goes all the way back to the original mint, so you can see the chain of custody for everything. And that goes way beyond the use case of an image. When you start talking about non-fungible documentation of manufacture of quality goods, etc., you can see where stuff was sourced from, the labor that it was worked on, etc. You can blockchain everything eventually. So.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to see like what are we solving with like pictures of apes and all that. And I was like, this is just who cares? It's an easy entry to prove out the technology without a lot of risk of disruption of the existing system. However,
it's a demonstration of value.
Yeah, I think that line is being snapped now, that they're like, well, wait a minute here, there's other things that we can do to lift some of that adjudication of where things are at in the process outside of those centralized entities. Because right now, like in Pivot to like application development, I have to make an interface agreement with any third party I want to deal with, from if that's just send in an EDI, exchange of internet, electronic data interchange to say, I'm purchasing something from them and I've invoiced them or whatever. That's our system to that system. Having that up a level to where now you can have unique keys that are shared without all that other infrastructure or agreements on format, because now we'll go to a smart contract now that will have the format. It changes everything when it comes to participation between the people, allowing people to subscribe to things. You have a lot more data control. And then probably the most important thing that I think companies are finally starting to figure out is one of the most expensive things is data at rest. So if something's been at rest for a while, sitting in data, you don't trust it. You go back and like, no, it's been in there, but it's been in there for about a year, and I don't know if I trust that right now. So you have to like go through and make sure it has been altered or changed, who has access to it, in companies. And you go through what's considered a V&V, a verification and validation of it. There's just cycle time that's just used, manpower, overhead, that if it's on the chain, you're like, well, of course it hasn't been, because nobody besides myself can manipulate that, or if there is changes to it, it's made an update in here. So you change the whole concept of a risk of data at rest stuff. So again, it's still, we're not talking even currencies, we're just talking the use of a crypto in a way that stores information that happens to have connection to a token, because that's what's incentivizing the folks hosting that environment, which are miners and proof of work chains, validators for proof of stake chains. So again, I always, and what I try to convey usually on the channel isn't just, here's how you can mine, it's what's the greater good of this to change society in better ways with it that happens to also generate a lot of money. It's always been focused primarily from the masses on the money side because factual has went up in value a lot. So it's still going to have that, but it's another supporting thing that I would say that people are like, oh, it's just, fair weather if people come and go with crypto, if it's not worth something. And there has been drawdowns and people have exited. Same people are back, right? Trying to get the ride back in.
You heard about the state of Missouri, how they got in trouble, all those social security numbers that were found by the St. Louis Post. Did you hear about that?
This is news to me also.
Yeah, so it was all over the Post, but St. Louis, Missouri had all this database on some server or website, but apparently they didn't have it secure enough, so 100,000 social security numbers of all teachers in Missouri were leaked. And so I was just thinking about your scenario, if that was on the blockchain, that could easily be avoided, right?
Well, you can create, so where the blockchain would come in from a security standpoint to secure data that, so first of all, you don't want social security numbers on the blockchain, even if you're wrapping them in a way that would require like key pair to unlock. But you could have that as, if you think of like traditional security, you usually have certificate authority, which is somebody local that's handling access to that data, and then you have like identity management, which is the way you log into things. Where crypto would come in is you'd have like this third tertiary thing to where you're creating essentially a crypto ID, which is a public-private key pair, and you add that into your keychain. So you would have a crypto wallet that then would have to be unlocked, and you could lock the data in such a way that each time you went to access, you create all the records into a singular accessible thing. So they wouldn't get the honeypot of everything, they would only get one ID. And it's a lot of effort to grab into one ID.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt at all. I just wanted to say that's actually, for a good example of that, currently working. That's what Cardano is doing in Ethiopia with their Ministry of Education adoption right now. They're onboarding 750,000 students and 250,000 teachers right now onto the blockchain with digital IDs, where they're going to be recording grades and recording and analyzing data throughout these students' lifespan as a student, and then as they graduate out, their certifications, diplomas, etc., will already be on the blockchain, and then you'll be able to just carry that forward, almost like a social security number. But everything from your entire educational past and certifications, achievements, etc., can all be privately accessed, and they're immutable on the blockchain forever. So that's actually currently in adoption with a couple of different chains.
Yeah, and you think of a lot of that kind of stuff right now sits in whatever learning management system of wherever you were at.
Exactly.
And there's a data call from a company, if you're working there, to say, hey, did this person attend these things? And there's a lot of overhead on all that. So doing that, there's a balance, and you'll see it if you watch on crypto Twitter and stuff. There's a balance of, do we put some of that kind of stuff on chain? Is there a privacy concern, or is there, government telemetry? Could it be used against you? You look at both sides of it. It's kind of like, I usually like doing everything as like a quad chart. Like, what's the huge benefit? A lot of less overhead.
100%.
I don't have it all distributed in all these different companies that could go away or lose information. So it's always there. So you get that access forever, which is nice, but then you have to balance it against.
How do you protect it forever?
How do you protect it from somebody not just accessing it, but how do we protect it for it being used for non-intended use type of things? So that's the other kind of outlier, I think, in the crypto telemetry space of like, there needs to be one more layer added to it to where it's like fair use access versus privileged access to that information of what it's being used for. I mean, we look at that from like a Facebook and all these kind of things where we all kind of accepted the terms, and then because the mechanics of the way the APIs work, people could grab that telemetry if they had the right privileged access, and then you have stuff like Cambridge Analytica, and now you have this, big data issue where people can leverage that to heuristics and then make decisions and not give us pointed ads, right? So it's like, wasn't the original intent or the use of when they designed it. It was more for speed, but then you had somebody that collected the data, created telemetry on the data, and then created this whole entire service thing that then they would sell back to people, right? So it's like, same kind of thing can happen on the chain with even more or less cost, because now you don't have all these other data servers that you know. It's all on the blockchain. It's all there. I get a wallet and I can tie into it. So there is going to be. It's the same thing before we went kind of. I guess this is live talking to each other. We were talking about the risk in general, where if you have, I almost lost my train of thought on this. What was the thing that we were talking? Oh, the F5. So like when we're talking about these chains that are like proof of stake that are supposed to be a lot faster than Bitcoin, and you look at Solana, you look at Polkadot, and Cardano, they have these really fast systems. They've transferred some of the decentralization for a little more centralization, but allowed a better user experience. Well, it doesn't matter if like NFT drops will thread out those networks right now. And it all comes back down to, even with all their parachains and everything else, that you have millions of people trying to access something really quick. It doesn't have a way to distribute it. So like the access to the data, there still needs to be kind of a load balance. For example of what's in the centralized world right now, we have like an F5 is a piece of equipment that takes the load that's coming into it and allows everybody to have kind of equal access at the same time. That's why all of us can get on Facebook or Google at the same time and have almost the same experience without any kind of speed impact. Is because there's this load balancer out there taking the request and sending it to different data servers and servers to allow that experience to be nice. In crypto, there's concepts of duplication of all these networks, like parachains is an example I keep using, side chains, Plasma. There's these different tech stacks that attempt to do that, but there's not really a good spot for this tech that would be a load balancer. So then if there was an NFT drop, we could all at the same time get on and try to get it. That doesn't exist yet, and not in a way that would allow any of these things to work well. Whoever builds that is going to be...
The only reason I'm going to keep coming back to Cardano is because it's where I spend a lot of my time.
Yeah.
That's what I'm familiar with.
Look at his t-shirt. Wait a second.
Look at that. Yeah. They are building Hydra right now, and parachains from Polkadot are basically built on Cardano's consensus algorithm already. Do you know anything about their implementation of something similar to Cardano's Hydra moving forward? Are they going to use the same concept?
I don't know enough to talk about it technically yet. I have been researching Cardano's and just looking at what their, the impact on when they do get like smart contracts and how that's going to look, just from having what's a cross comparison from their capability versus something that you could build on Solana versus something you could build on Polkadot right now. Just from that view is the only depth that I've went, because I wanted to have kind of I call it a quad chart, but like, what could I do on this chain versus what could I do on this chain, and circumstantially it had ties into this other technology that would make it either faster or have a better data interface. But no, I don't have to see if they're going to solve that kind of thing. I think I'm not saying it's unsolvable, but it's like a lot of these chains when Bitcoin first started, and we look at decentralization and we look at fees that go up when lots of people start to use it, and then we start to think, oh man, we'd say it's this world currency, but if we had a whole bunch of people get on it, it's immediately shut down because there's just there's not enough block space, and then that got into the blockchain wars of like the size, and you make the bucket bigger. But that still ultimately doesn't solve it at the end of the day. I mean, you can get it some relief if you can put more in the train car.
Exactly.
And keep
that's,
going down
that's
the
what we're
tracks.
looking at right now, but the question is, how do you solve it?
Yeah, it's more of like,
Exactly.
it's more of like it needs to step back, and you need like the conductor to say you're on this train, you're on this train, right? That's the concept of like the parachains, and that is like, instead of getting everything into one block, we'll reconcile the fact that they left the station and we know which chain had what sets of information. But it needs to have that kind of person directing it.
Well, and it eventually will allow for like large infrastructure companies to have their own dedicated side chain, essentially, right? So, like, I mean, eventually, if Walmart wanted to be onboarded, they could they'll have a specific chain that only runs their specific commerce back and forth, and it won't affect the rest of the network. So they could have an NFT drop at the same time, so they have some sale going on, and it's not going to be in the portal.
Yeah, you can have like, I think ultimately, I mean, that's the way, if you look at the way data structures and CDNs, so content delivery networks. I like comparing a lot of the current world that I work, like the day job stuff is in like building data centers and building large architecture setups. So I look at everything like, content delivery networks. How do I get millions of people on a system at the same time, type of thing. So that's like my background in history. So I try to cross compare, like what's crypto trying to do versus what is possible on the centralized side, and then how's the security layer work on that? How does that work with like edge security, access to information? But yeah, it's that the large gap is, if we're going to get potentially billions of people on this thing at the same time, is how do you handle it?
Yeah.
And how do we have the same user experience and have access to the same information? Because that's another huge key piece.
Consensus.
Walmart could have its own parachain, however, not that we need to look at specific transactions, because some of those are going to be locked up in some way that is just like a key reference, and we're like, I don't know what that means, but in some database it has a reference,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
somebody knows what it is. But the fact that we can see a transaction occurred on that
Exactly.
keeps it all on the same level playing field, and that's kind of the point, right? Is that it's transparency in the transaction, not necessarily need the detail to that, because some of that's going to be privileged for all kinds of reasons. And that's why I think a lot, when you saw like IBM in the beginning, like some of the bigger companies back in 2018 that was kind of pushing price up, right? It was like, oh, IBM and Microsoft and all these folks are in it. And it's like, well, they were looking at like some of these business problems, and they're like, well, we can't put privileged information. And when I say privileged, it doesn't mean that it's privileged over somebody else. It literally means like it's private.
Like, you
It's
can't know that.
Stuff underneath an NDA, right? It's stuff that probably shouldn't be in the public. However, the fact of a transaction occurring does trigger all kinds of things. So I would go back in those days and talk to them on the IBM thing, those things, and I would say, you guys are trying to put the entire thing on this, and that's not the way it works. You can keep all those, databases because it's company information, but the trigger points of when certain things happen, that's where you put on blockchain. So then if I'm some third-party vendor or I'm somebody else, I can see that event occurred without having to create an interface agreement with you.
Yeah.
Like you're just pushing versus me, pulling the information from your system. The reason why we're all talking about all this tech stuff is because that's what gives a lot of this stuff value. Most people hear just price. They hear what's the next token. The stuff that makes this stuff actually bullish for like some of the larger investors and stuff is literally the utility of it. Like, why would I invest? Now, that doesn't say that it's everything. Like, we got Sheeb and SafeMoon and all these other things that people, the TikTok coins, the community coins, I'd call them meme coins, that people are all sharing around saying it's going to go to the moon. I mean, I said this back in 2014 on the channel with Dogecoin when it first came out, and it was one of those things that if the community gets behind something, a lot of cool things can happen. I mean, they put the what was it, the I can't think of it. They did the NASCAR sponsorship, to get awareness. They put the Jamaican bobsled team to the Olympics, right? It was like a community got behind it. It was kind of the Redditor kind of community. Same way with like Wall Street Bets did for AMC and some of the other things. So numbers matter there, and Sheeb and the Doge did that. And I don't think that goes away right away. I think, but it could be like a trend that 5 years from now, is it still there, right? If the folks kind of like, oh, that was fun, they accident and they don't come back to it. It's it has a higher chance to be more fair weather than something that's building architecture.
Exactly.
And that's why I always tell people to caution. You might be able to get a little lift on it, but just understand that easy come, easy go came from stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
So like
100%.
it could have been just the new trend, and then something else falls into it. And I think we've seen that with Doge right now with Sheep. Sheep's kind of taken the thunder from it, and Doge has just stayed at 23 cents, and it went on to 74 cents, right? So it's just, invest in, as most people would have to say, not financial advice, but personally, I would invest in things that have a little more runway on innovation, development. What are they trying to make? Because at the end of the day, what gives those value versus a company issuing out things is that most of those tokens have some finite value. Some of them are already produced, like they've already put their amount out, and some have, an inflation, like Bitcoin. Ethereum has an inflation rate, so over time, the use of those tokens are like fuel, and the transactions promote value. So people need something to use that utility. They got to buy it, and you're going to have a natural demand supply issue. So, you know, you're going to have, as the utility starts to use, and we're seeing it with Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum's setting at $4,400, not because people are memeing it up. It's literally because people are buying it to buy
Because it
things.
works.
And because it works.
It's
right?
expensive to use. That's the only, really, if
Yeah.
Ethereum wasn't so expensive to use, it would have solved almost everything at this point in time.
Yeah.
The problem is that gas fees are, this is an opinion maybe, but in my opinion at this point in time, gas fees are a function, not a bug.
Yeah.
They're designed to keep you off the chain when it's too heavy. They're designed to preference the heavy investors and the people with the big money who don't care to spend $800 to move their 200,000. And that's the way it's supposed to work. So at this point, the problem is, can they scale that down without breaking the network as it exists and then continue to incentivize the people who already made it on the network? And that's really the game theory concern I have with Ethereum as a chain, because otherwise it works. It's a beautiful product and I really like it. It's too expensive for the average retail investor and for somebody who's new at this point in time to come in and transact on it and conduct business on it at this point.
Yeah,
So-
it's pretty much priced out. I would say the first entry, if you've never bought it.
Full retail investors. is
Yeah,
priced out
unless
to
you're
Ethereum.
using a centralized chain or a centralized like Coinbase. Coinbase is just doing an internal ledger update.
Yep.
You know, they're not moving the coin. They're just saying, oh, you own this part of this stack that we have.
It's a spreadsheet. Yeah, and it's an IOU.
Yeah.
You don't own it. They own
Right.
it, and it's an IOU for it.
And until you move it, and then when you go to move it, then you find out, oh, that's going to cost you, $40 to move this. You're like, I'm just going to leave it in Coinbase, right? Like
$40 is cheap.
yeah, that's cheap. That's cheap. But
Just a tank of gas, Dad.
yeah. It's literally like I did see a meme on that. Somebody was like saying when I heard that Ethereum had some fees, I didn't realize the gas fees were going to be as much, and they put like an excursion thing.
It's kind of gas.
For me to move
It's actually
it. Moving my money.
It's just gas.
It's just gas fees. But yeah, it's the memes are
themselves,
pretty
right?
good. But yeah, I mean, it prices out like a lot of the newer adopters. It definitely prices people out of using the decentralized part of it, because all those, especially, and then if you want to get into minting something,
Oh, it's insane.
part of the new, use an example for the NFTs or any kind of product development, you have your fungible building, which is like ERC20. So if you're going to make something that's the same, like you're going to build a token, and that token is fungible by that nomination, is ERC20. So I think build one of those right now, you're looking at $700 to $1,100 to mint that, which is insane. I mean, like I remember we did a demo years ago on it, and it was like 22 cents or something. And I was like, wow, that's 22 cents. That's expensive, like to mint one. And yeah, it's just and then 11.55 is the other. And depending on the complexity of the 1155 ERC. So if you ever hear like ERC, it's like like EIPs are Ethereum improvement plans, and then those have functions, which you'll hear like ERC20, ERC 1155. Those are just functions inside of Ethereum that do things. So an ERC20 is just to make new tokens. And then a lot of the subsequent other chains like Binance, Smart Chain, which effectively just clone Ethereum, and then centralize some of the functions when it comes to like the validation network versus having proof of work miners on it. They effectively copied. So, but they clone the same nomenclature. So it's like BEP, I think it's BEP 20.
and 20.
Yeah.
But they also have BRC 20 B and B.
Yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yes.
Is that considered a bridge from Binance to Ethereum?
No.
The-
I don't know if you can't dex it to each other.
Wrap it.
You have to be.
You have to be
you
wrapped.
wrap it and then unwrap it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then, yeah, so, and then it gets even more confusing if you add in like Cosmos Network, where they're trying to do like the Internet of Blockchains thing.
Have
where-
you? I didn't want to bring it up and like interrupt the whole Ethereum thing. But
Yeah.
have you been looking into Secret at all? That's what they're doing. Secret's on Atom, and it just kind of recently ran up a little bit. To the Z brothers who are here most weeks pointed it out to me last week, and it's like a full private encryption smart contracts blockchain. Like what you were talking about with
Like a
private
little bit.
keys. That's what you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. Every transaction is private keys. So when you were talking about like big companies can't put their information on a blockchain, they can put it on.
Well, they
Secret.
could, so you can use Z addresses on like Zcash. You can
Oh, I'm
use
just saying, like,
stuff
it's not a
that-
ZK either. It's
Yeah.
it's like just encrypted. So it's pretty cool tech, and I'm I'm like flirting with the ability to understand most of it, honestly. But you might find it really interesting. And they actually just announced this morning that they're going to drop an NFT collection from Quentin Tarantino, which I think might get some headlines. So that might be interesting, just like paying attention to. But since we ran right into it, and you asked about Atom, I was curious if you knew anything about it, because I'm brand new to Atom and I don't get it that much yet. But I'm figuring it out.
Cosmos and Tendermint is very interesting. Yeah. Tendermint's interesting because it had, when you look at, I like tracking like what are countries, companies, what are they, like what's their innovation groups looking at?
100%.
And you know, the U.S. government's done a lot of stuff with just exploration, but there's been a lot of, you know, public, if you do enough searching on it, you'll find it with like Tendermint, which is the underlying architecture under the Cosmos network, of things that have gotten deployed as, you know, test events for like DARPA and Navy research labs and stuff. So when they're looking at doing things with, they made a copy of, like when you have 3D printing, which is funny because we got 3D printing up here in the front. When you have that approved print, something that has went through some kind of adjudication to say, this is the version of a belt buckle for, you know, a plane, that we're not going to put something airworthy in there, but saying something that is, that if I'm afloat, like, you know, if it's the Navy is afloat, you know, they're out at sea, they have their own databases and stuff on their ships, and they want to print something that's all about locked baselines. So it's like, I print this, it needs to be absolutely perfect, it hasn't been altered or anything. So one of the things that I know Tendermint was being looked at is, can I take those baselines, those files, and hash them, and then store those as a record, and then have a small local network between ship to ship. So then if you were to try to manipulate that record before we print it, like you would have to have more than 33% of the network, right? So it's going to compare the hashes that's written chain and validate that it won't print unless it makes that validation. I mean, that's an applicable use case for a company that would use something like that. And I mean, that could be technically written in anywhere, to be honest with you. It could be in Ethereum, it could be in any of these, but having this catalog, as it were, to validate, like, has this baseline changed or not? And if so, fetch this file that matches that hash and then print. I mean, that's a perfect example of a use case where in companies, if you had it in your database, you still always have that risk of who's the administrator, right? And you think about it, the last year, think of all of the impacts on hacks. I mean, Twitter got hacked, and like a 14-year-old, and it had privileged tool access. You know, got to the privileged tool access, and they could start posting on people's behalf, start looking at everybody's DM. You look at all of these, you know, exposures where servers get hit, and like taking that access and adding in that layer is
Absolutely.
But
it sounds stupid to ask, but does anyone know it sounds so stupid to say, is anyone doing a clearinghouse on fees for Ethereum? Like, we all send our transaction to the clearinghouse, they batch it, wait, do one gas fee, and then resend them back out.
So,
it sounds so stupid that someone could do that because that's the old way to do finance, but there's a business model right there.
yeah, so if you look at MEV, when you talk to the MEV extraction, so miner extracted value. So we'll crawl walk around it. So you send a transaction to Ethereum, it goes into a memory pool. Just collection of all these things that are happening. Ethereum runs a 15-second block time. So every 15 seconds you have an opportunity to be included in that transaction. MEV, which is miner extracted value, is a way for pools to look at what's being submitted and look for like high arbitrage opportunities, and then be able to insert a transaction ahead of somebody else's. They're like, oh, they're doing something that looks like I'm going to make money. I'm going to insert that transaction ahead of them, which will validate them. It'll say that their transaction failed. I'll actually be able to take the arbitrage. So because of that, and because it got very competitive, and if you look up, I did a video on it a few years ago, but if you look up, we call it Flash Boys 2.0, and it's from a book of what folks used to do with like stock exchange, trying to get down to the closest part of the transaction on the Bloomberg terminals, to try to be able to insert trades before other people. Same kind of concept, just public ledger. So what's happened now is
pools have had this whole concept of private transactions to where you could send your transaction to them and you pay a privileged fee, but you're making sure you don't get front ran. And the pool for that fee will wait until they win a block and then they'll insert you on the top spot.
So like if it took a day to complete the hash versus.
Correct. Well, it comes down to how quick can they get the privilege, how quick can they win a block? And it's just a huge transaction. And what Ethermine, or if you look on etherscan.io now and you look at transactions, you can now sort them by a filter called private transaction. And that's what that means. That means that somebody was trying to get their transaction through, but they didn't want to publish it to the public memory pool, which is also, if you'll hear a term, if you're doing research on it, called the dark forest. And they call that the memory pools the dark forest, because you're essentially thinking, I'm submitting this and I'm going to do well on this. And there's like, why didn't this work? Everything looked like it was. It's the dark forest. Somebody else sees it and then.
No one's doing like it sounds really weird to have to do it, but no one's doing like, oh, we'll run this transaction at 3 a.m. with lower gas fees and charge you a tenth of it if you send it to us first, and then we forward it on to your forwarding wallet, and please trust us, because of course you trust this company with your transaction.
Yeah, so far nobody's done that, because it's essentially you're making, so they would have to do it to where they could do it like that. You would have to create a tool or an interface that allowed you to go all the way through like you're creating a transaction.
Yeah.
And then it would create all that transaction data, and then you would have to submit that as a package to somebody, and then they would then go and do that. I haven't heard of any that have done
You guys
that.
all heard it here first.
I have a question for that. I have maybe a little understanding on this, but doesn't that require,
$5 fee to not pay
wouldn't that kind of
$50
require,
gas
on-
fee?
Makes sense.
And I don't care
on
if it takes
the
an
company
hour.
side,
Yeah.
predictable
Shows up
fees to
what
be
it's
able
supposed
to
to
say,
be.
I can process your transaction at X time, like a promise time would require predictable fees, which is a significant problem.
Well, what they would do on that case is they would just give you a range predicated on the history of saying, well, typically it's this, but it could never maybe hit the, and let's say your threshold is like, I don't want to pay 80, but I'll pay 5 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, 5 to 8 are usually Tuesdays at 3 a.m. We'll try to get it next Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe they miss that cycle. So if, like from an SLA standpoint, like a service level agreement, when you send to them, it would be like, yeah, sorry, we missed that, but here's the data that shows that we could have never submitted
never
for
done
that.
that,
So you'd have to have some kind of like threshold on it. But I mean, it could be a thing
It
to
could be
save
done.
money. You're just trading immediate time for a saving in a fee.
It looks like Koala payments on blockchain. At the same time, you could just do a Coinbase stuff. Yeah, sure, send me that. Cool, tomorrow send this guy. You don't even have to actually execute the transfer. If you just hold a pool, you're basically charging a gas fee without actually doing any exchange, as long as you send the final wallet that amount at some point within the SLA time.
Yeah.
You just have to have a rich person back you and buy all the coins up front. And then figure out the math on whenever those block times are the cheapest. And then execute all your trades you need to do, or DEXs at that time, and you could probably still float the money for the reduced fee to the end user.
I mean, you could.
And you know what, you could use
You wouldn't
another
even need
company's
the money if you
blockchain to
did that right,
validate it. You
actually.
could use Solana and $2 to validate the transfer as a simple NFT. Here's a record that shows you that can't be fake, that we did this trade
Yeah.
for you at whatever SLA time, which would also be hilarious.
So as long as the interface was built right, none of the money would ever come from you. You'd literally be just the information handler. So they would be submitting the transaction. You would need a tool that looks like a wallet
Yeah.
that connects to your actual wallet to be able to get the right signatures in place to submit that.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know how it would look, because you're right, you theoretically want.
And then all you're doing is just transmitting it for them, and then it happens to come from their wallet where they're going. You would never change any money from you. You would just, when they submit that package to you, they would have to pay you in something that's probably not that native currency, because they would have another transaction.
Yeah, you'd have to make, you could make a.
So
coin
you're
for
like,
that.
we'll do your Ethereum transactions and you pay us in Matic because it's cheaper. And
cheaper,
then
yeah.
we'll submit it for you at the right time for the best cost, and then you're getting paid from them by Matic.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can think architecturally how you'd be able to do that. I just don't, it'd be like, and probably why this hasn't occurred is people, I think, have probably an expectation that at some point fees will get cheaper. You know, so nobody's went through the effort to build that yet because
they were figuring that, well, this would be short-lived if
an
fees
impermanent
fell
business
back
model.
down and then nobody would use it. That's your only risk with it. You just want to, luckily, a lot of these chains have almost the same kind of data set to where, you know, you could do it to multiple other types of coins, but nothing has the higher fees than
like a
Ethereum.
Bitcoin wallet.
Look, I have a question because the expectation is that the gas fees will fall eventually at some point. But if I'm Ethereum, why would I drop my gas fees when the customers are paying them anyway?
Well, I mean, that's part of a concern, because it is like, are you trying to solve it for everybody, or is it good enough? And just, so the developers, it's a very weird thing. It's like in typical companies, you have a product owner and you have somebody that's hearing all that like hate, right? The developers are like, we're gonna write code and it happens to work like this, and we have a roadmap, and this isn't our job to fix it. And that's where it kind of gets the tear, and the folks that are like, why haven't you fixed gas fees, why haven't you done this? And this has also been part of my concern with the related motivation that they'll have to ever fix things like get the faster speed with like their side chains, Plasma, and let people that have validated nodes on ETH 2.0 withdraw, right? Where they're pushing heavy to try to merge consensus, which still allows people not to withdraw their coins on ETH 2.0. And I would think if I locked up funds last December, we're about to come into December again. Now they've been locked up for a year. Their roadmap right now, on the next thing on their list, is now probably May, if not this time next year, when ETH 2.0 finally launches with just the consensus. Still can't withdraw my funds. So now we're almost 2 years that funds are locked up. So much so that there's third parties that are saying, we'll buy your node and we'll give you your money back and we'll just host your node, right? And so there's this whole new wrapped Ethereum concept to where they'll just allow you to get some of your money back, and it never moves. They don't have the right incentives to ever let people withdraw, and then now they have this exponential increase potentially in ETH's value, because now you don't have all this inflation that's hitting the system, and then people just borrow against that inflation versus ever removing their node, right? So it gets in this big like iterative loop, and I went and to explain it in that way, which is it all comes back down to motivation of why they want to do it. And to your point, they don't have the right motivations because people aren't necessarily falling off Ethereum. Some of the transactions are as high as they've ever been. Value is right now punching through all-time high. The motivation isn't there to fix some of the complaining, because at the end of the day, they're like, it's higher than it's ever been, and we're having higher use than we've ever had. Why would we go change to try to add more people? You want faster speed, use another chain. And then they can claim that, look, of all this business we've sent these other folks, right? You know.
But I guess unless they see some kind of analytics that if the gas fee is dropped, that they can even get more customers, and that can even push them up more.
The thing with Ethereum though is, as if they begin to lose a customer base, the gas fees will fall naturally, and then that will
less use.
It's a feedback loop.
And there was a dip, and gas fees came back after May, a lot, and it was a two-part thing. One, there was a drawdown, but Ethereum went all the way back down to almost the $2,000, which slowed down the usage. And then you also had, at that time, everybody switched into a lot of the functions like Z.run and a few of the bigger applications all switched to Matic. So then now you had all their fees coming off of that Ethereum network and going to Matic. So now Matic's full. Like every other block in Matic is full. So there's a few other alternatives to that. So you'll see some relief if people move to layer 2, which will then release less, or put a relief on the gas fee side of it. But still, I mean, it's layer 1 is kind of just held a lot of the attention. A lot of it also is the development. I mean, a lot of the core development that's done on Ethereum, not just the core developers, to be confused with that, just people that have learned to develop in Solidity and Rust and that are developing for this ecosystem, understand layer 1 and they're deploying in layer 1. So they're not going to pause what they're doing in their project and go, well, let's look at this other blockchain that happens to be complementary to Ethereum and build our stuff there to make fees cheaper. Because from a user experience standpoint, all of us, like if I went to everybody and said, "Do you have Ethereum and know how to get Ethereum?" Most people would say yes, especially in this room. Hey, do you know how to go get Matic and set up your MetaMask on Matic and all that? It was, I haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like you still got that user adoption side to try to push people to layer 2. I mean, even miners, like I cover a lot of stuff with mining on our channel, and the miners, there's been a lot of complaints on Twitter and stuff like, oh, my payouts take forever, and then we pay this huge fee, we're mining and it's taking $20 or whatever. Well, you can switch over your payouts to Matic and make it a lot faster and pay a lot less fee. And that's a service that the pools are doing, and effectively they're just converting it for you. And you're then paid out in this other, faster thing. Still, there's a majority that are still just doing, they haven't, I don't call it lazy, it's technical, there's technical risk with it, right? If you don't feel like you're comfortable with it, and now you got this other thing you got to install. And a lot of miners, especially larger miners, all go offline with their stuff to maybe like a ledger, and they're not necessarily wanting to like invoke that environment and change that because there's risk with that.
They don't want 2.0 either because their fees will go down quite a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean I could have a whole entire session on Ethereum 2.0.
I know I could personally benefit from this. I'm sure there are other people in the room that could personally benefit this. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the trade-off of like speed versus security on layer 2 and cost versus security on layer 2s versus layer 1? I think that could probably
for a
lot of people.
Ultimately, the difference between the layers is the broadcast. So, like in a proof of work network like Ethereum is, you have nodes, and the miners are essentially just working on work coming from the node to get the ability to mint the next block, right? That's everybody's competing. All miners are working on the exact same problem at the exact same time. So the problem is a block is found, next new block comes up. So the pools are hosting a node essentially and saying, send your hash rate to us, and then we'll collectively share based on your proportional hash rate, based on what you're sending up, that you will get part of this reward. Well, that entire concept is very slow by nature of transactions because you're waiting at the speed of the blockchain, right? You're waiting Ethereum every 15 seconds. Your best opportunity to make a transaction is 15 seconds. A lot of competition on the transaction that can go into that box. When you start to look at, you're threaded to certain transactions per second, right? It's like 15 or 20 with Ethereum. It's 7 with Bitcoin, 7 transactions per second. When you look at something like layer 2, there's a completely different concept of that, where you can have multiple things going on at the same time, and the validators can do buckets of stuff, right? So they can process a lot more transactions. I think we actually saw that with Solana recently, to where there was like a DDoS attack on it and went up to 400,000 transactions per second and then crashed.
That's what you're saying, man.
And required all the nodes to make like code changes to reboot the network. So it's a transfer of that decentralization to more of a semi-centralized, or I could call it federated, because some of those validators are chosen and voted based on large stakeholders, which comes back into that kind of risk of privileged networks versus non-privileged networks. So if you have a lot of money and you make the investment risk to buy into this, you can have a controlling stake in the network to make decisions, vote on things, that kind of stuff. So you're just transferring the risk profile from a proof of stake network for speed. You're trading off, and they call it the Trilemma. It's like, your security, which is a basic concept that if you think of security in its most simplest form of like, can one or a small group of individuals make a change to this? Yes or no, true, the issue. With Bitcoin, no, we can't even, the Bitcoiners can't even agree on ever making an accepted change to where Bitcoin hasn't had a quote unquote hard fork ever. It's had just soft forks, which means that the actual code base has never went a different direction. There's been clones of it coming off of it. There was the Bitcoin Cash was a separation of ideas, and it spawned a different network. But Bitcoin's main core stays afoot because you have this massive distribution. massive global distribution, provable hash rate size. Ethereum, second by far. Proof of work network, slow rolling. When it comes to its transactions per second, that's why we're paying high fees. Stuff like Cardano, Polkadot, a lot of the other networks, dare I say EOS, but has a validator network which doesn't require all that infrastructure, but it's trading the risk of somebody large being able to shut it down. And I'll use an example of, and I say this with Ethereum 2.0, one of the biggest existential risk is, even though the way Ethereum's validator node structure is, meaning mining goes away, and you have participants that have 32 ETH, and they can make a hosted node, is the incentive pushes all that up to the world's clouds, because you want the lowest, leanest operating cost, even in proof of stake, which means that you're probably going to host it on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. You're transferring that risk that if there is ever a G8 summit that says, we should probably shut some of this down if we can, and makes a call to all the clouds and does like a parlor on them, cut off their access, and you shut down overnight Ethereum's Infura services, which would shut down most of all their services. You shut down validator nodes everywhere. So now your validator networks drop significantly, 60-70%, because most of them are probably going to be cloud hosted. That's the risk. That's the footprint risk. Now, is any one country going to do that? I mean, I would say the U.S. is probably the biggest risk candidate of doing that, because that's where the world's clouds reside. That's where the headquarters of them reside. All the major clouds reside here in the U.S., right? The owners of the headquarters. Google, Microsoft, and AWS, which have data centers all over the world and pretty much run the world's networks when it comes to all the data and services, right? So if you've transferred the value proposition for speed and now all that ends up there, that's part of the risk. So I mean, I went to DevCon, I'm like, hey, I like speed. I think user experience is huge. However, I think it's going to be a mix if they can move to a place to where we can still have that, and then there's some kind of empirical connection to like Bitcoin, to where the record is still secured in some way and has some kind of connection, so people that don't want to lose the full piece, or if you shut off this one piece, you still have this record down on Bitcoin that's just centralized. I think that's where it's going to end up being.
Do all or some of the layer 2s use the layer 1s to resolve?
Yes, all the layer 2s are empirically connected to them.
So it's kind of like what that gentleman was talking about, where they're kind of pooling transactions and doing them on the layer 2, and then doing it on layer 1, at a slower rate. And that's how they can do it faster.
So they'll check point on it. So like you can have a bundle of transactions that are fast, and that bundle will make a hash. And then that hash will guarantee that bundle didn't change by writing it down to layer 1. So now you have this payload essentially that's written down on layer 1. So you can guarantee this connection up to the top. And you could go from that up to another layer to make it even faster if you wanted to have some kind of localized. So the layer 3 of that would be if you had a company that made a side chain like Walmart or whoever, and they wrote their own smart contracts, and they had their own connection on just Walmart, and they were hashing the fact that nothing changed on all of their transactions down to layer 2 that might have some of their buyers or other companies, if that's Mattel for like toys or something, they would be at that layer 2, and they would have that connection at layer 2 because it's fast. And then the bundles of all those transactions then would have just a single 64-character alphanumeric hash that linked all 3 layers up to each other.
Is that a similar concept to SegWit or Lightning?
Correct, absolutely. So think of Lightning and SegWit. The best way I've always heard and actually use this expression is a bar tab transaction. You go into a bar, you have a credit card. Start a tab, drop it down. Microtransactions all night, one post at the end. Bundled set of transactions, sometimes very expensive, and then they make a single post to your credit card. And they'll send that manifest. Some of them will, like, hey, you bought all of these things, with this one one single transaction on the credit card. So it's just bundled transactions at the end of the day. And the way the blockchain stores it is essentially a key that says this key you can reference up here. And if you want that detail, then the detail is usually stored off chain. Just like most NFTs are just the framework. It's like, I own this house. Well, on the chain, it will be just the deed, right? It's the fact of that occurred. But the house physical, you have to go to. On an NFT, that picture is stored typically on IPFS, which is interplanetary file system, which is just like a non-annexed list of just data. And it's also, you have IPFS hosts that are incentivized for certain networks when you talk storage J or something like Filecoin, stuff like that. That has had, it's just a lot of those things like Filecoin and stuff like that, it's crowdsourced infrastructure that's incentivized by the token. So it's saying, we made a token, and if you host this stack of hardware, we'll pay you for this rate. And Filecoin's extremely expensive. Like that was what the best way I would call it is like that was the true blue thing of an investment, because you went in deep. Like it was $300,000 to build a Filecoin stack. So if I was just like one of these ant miners, you know, I don't even know what you guys are selling those ones for, but like $13,500, $15,000 to $15,000 right now is what those things are going for. Like that's for Bitcoin mining, that's pretty high cost. But right now, it's like $80 a day in generation, right? So like, Filecoin was like 200 grand. You might get paid back in 5 years, maybe. You know, if it takes off, or it could go crazy, and you could make it back in 18 months if the world starts storing their data on that.
Do you think that Filecoin would have had any sort of takeoff like it did if Grayscale hadn't backed them, though?
Probably not, because there's 5 other coins that do the same thing.
Exactly.
I think you got Sidecoin, you got, well, a lot of these, like you look at, what's that, I don't know, ICP, right?
Yeah. No, trust me.
Nobody knows anything about ICP. It drops from Coinbase, and then it's in the top 10. And it's like, what is this? Like,
it jumped too. It made me Google it.
Yeah, it jumped up in price, and then it fell down to $30. And it was like 400 or something. And I remember making a tweet. I'm like, what? Like, you don't get to go to the top 10 just because you airdropped in and you had Coinbase behind
I
you.
made a tweet that said ICP has fallen out of the top 10. Nature is healing, and I got attacked.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Like, oh my gosh, some of those people were, wow.
Yeah. Well, some of them are invested in pretty deep.
I guess they probably were, because wow.
And it's the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of promises stuff that's out there, and I mean, I try to cover a lot of stuff on there, but like a lot of people ask about like helium and stuff like that, and like helium's another one right now from a IoT standpoint, and in concept it's great. It's mesh networking.
Is that like Hedera?
No, Hedera Hashgraph is like a way to.
It's different than blockchain.
It's a graph, so it's like where a blockchain, think of it like a linear writing of data that's referring to the previous data. A hash graph is more like an Excel table, and it has a graph of information, and then you have like a reference ID. You can find certain pieces of information. It's like kind of like the way a database, like Hadoop works, and there's different ways. Like most databases are linear, you top to bottom, rational. And then you have some databases that are non-rational, that are like, I always use this expression, like, think if you're in a big hangar with like lots of metal buckets, and inside of them are a tennis ball, and now I want to make a query, and I say, lift all the tennis balls up and show me all the ones that are red. And there might be only 10 in that, but I can quickly scan the horizon and say, there's 10 of them. Certain data is done through like a list, some go like this, some go down, and then some are like, let me look at all the data and just take a scan of it really quick and get a very, like, visually we can do that. I mean, there's some of the, that's the way kind of like Hashgraph works with like a graph. You can see a lot more data quickly, you can scan it differently, and it can find, it can zero in on the question fast because you're
unique in that, or other graph.
So some of the algorithms of some of the proof of work uses graph. It uses the same kind of concept. Like if you're looking at, Ethereum on part of it on its DAG file. But yeah, the hash graph is its own thing, and it's just another unique way to store information and the way it does it.
And you know, is it what's its benefit? It all comes back down to is it faster? Does it allow less complexity? I think it actually adds complexity doing a hash graph than a typical chain. But then for that, what are the benefits? I think like with the Helium's incentive was spit out these devices. The devices are incentivized for you to run them, and then they will connect to each other, and you'll create essentially a sub-network, like a whole other layered network that's open source, and you can connect to it and connect it eventually to the internet. My issue with that, and I talked on the video about it, the reason why I haven't covered it is that they haven't reconciled like the way FCC works. So like, let's say that network takes off. Mesh networks for a while have been trying to get in some kind of public momentum where you could have a repurposed router, have it connected to your internet, dedicate a quarter of your internet to say, this is public, it'll connect to other mesh networks, and then if you get into an area that doesn't have good public Wi-Fi, you're like, oh, I can connect to Helium. And for use of that, I would pay in Helium. And now you have this other network that's all over the country that you could do. The problem is that the very basic terms of service on anybody's home internet is you can't redistribute it. Yeah. So it's like, if you do, like, where's the reconciliation there? Like, if this awesome network starts to take off and then you start seeing large bandwidth being used, and you got Helium holders and users are the ones benefiting, at some point the cable companies are still going to be like, wait a minute here, y'all have this whole separate repurposing of our network and you're making money on it?
Layer 2.
Yeah, it's our layer 2. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the risk with it. And so like I always try to caution people that that's an element that's just not a token. There's an actual piece of hardware and you can participate in the network. It's all the right elements. Miner, the miner is the node, and like the whole payment network all works, and it's like, it's a great idea and concept, and even if they're being, which I think they're being genuine of trying to literally do this, they just haven't, it's like building this thing that they haven't really reconciled with the FCC. I'm like, have you even talked to them? Have you talked to the cable companies? Is there a way for you guys to kind of work it in with them and say, hey, maybe this is an incentive where in our smart contracts that make this thing work, that you guys get a carrier ID, and if you're on this carrier ID, you're shaved off 0.2%. Like, be proactive with them, because you are using their infrastructure that they're charging you for, the person for. You don't get to inherit and use it as your own, unfortunately, because it's part of the terms of service. So, like, if they would do that, I would think that Helium would go to the moon. Like, because then, one, it's proactive, and it's just, at some point, someone's got to pay dirt on it. And it's like, man, I'd hate to own all this hardware and assets. And then the SEC shuts it down. Just the same way, like, and they can shut down that kind of hardware with
they only have developers now. They had no legal folks anymore.
I think they did. It's just, I don't think they felt like they needed to answer that call. And I don't know if that development is actually in the US. I think it might be Canada, but like, that's part of it too, is like jurisdictional, where,
just read all the clear rules from the SEC.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of that's also, does that fall in the safe harbor stuff? I say, I look at it like, well, that's usually tokenomics and all that, and this is pretty sound. I mean, you have a piece of hardware, it's doing a function, people can pay for said function. Like, I think it'll pass the Howard test. It's just more of, is the FCC going to shut you down at some point? And just like not ban it. It'd be hard for them to ban it, but they could find you broadcasting. I mean, hell, there's a map with it, literally. Like, and that's part of the reason why also is like it comes down to privacy and telemetry. And they don't necessarily narrow down where you're at, but literally you can go on a map and see that somebody in Troy, Illinois, like for me, is broadcasting Helium, right? And it's like, oh, I wonder if that's BBT. Go to his house, like, so it's like there's also a telemetry issue there too that could be a privacy thing. And that's the same thing, like Ethereum has a really cool concept, foam. I don't know if you ever, it's for where you could have your node broadcasting its location. So it's just a node. You don't have to have a piece of hardware or miner. And it was a way for a node to broadcast a certain function that would allow it to be geographically located for this other third-party service, which would be like for like 3D awareness of where you're at. Like, so it's like literally maps. So you could triangulate certain things in position. So you could create like AR, VR stuff because it's reference points or nodes that happen to be in a city, and you could create this map of where they're exactly at because they're connected to like a GPS broadcast next to the node. And now you have this whole rich data layer that would allow you this like matrix of where everything's at, and then you could create apps that were connected to a cell phone on an Ethereum app and then triangulate next to a node, and now you could have those are like broadcasters, and you'd have this like whole 3D experience using Ethereum nodes because circumstantially these people would be broadcasting their nodes, and then they would be incentivized to do it. Like you can create all this cool meta layer because it all comes back down to where's the broadcast piece at, and then can I create kind of some snap of, an environment that then AR, like you're walking around with your phone, like the way like Pokemon uses like your GPS, and then they've tagged locations. So think of it like that local business or something has a spinny, if anybody's done Pokemon, I don't know, I'm making an assumption here. But if it's all geolocated to a something, well, so they just use like maps and a location that's permanent.
They basically just drop a pin.
And drop the pin on that location, where this would be more dynamic to where that Ethereum node in your house is now broadcasting a location that connects to phone, and then people can build all these apps based on that service that just happens to be there. So
is that why Decentraland is going crazy right now?
I think part of it, so it's that whole data meta layer. I mean, Decentraland I think is pumping because Facebook came out and called themselves Meta. And their whole thing was the metaverse, and like so now it's all just they're getting the shotgun blast of ancillary benefit for the name convention. People are like, well, somebody doing this metaverse ahead of it, and if you like search on that and see Decentraland, they're like, well, this was the decentralized version of what Facebook's trying to do.
You see a future for that technology?
I see the future. I see the future.
Yeah. I think, VR and AR is going to change things. I'll give you an example. I used to go to I go to CES every year, but before that it was called Comdex. And I remember going to Comdex like in 2001, 2000. And it was the guy that invented the QR code got on stage. Like he unveiled it there. You can literally Google it. 2000, I think it was the year 2000 Comdex. That was like it was right around the same time when the Segway guy came out back then. About here's some innovations going to change everything. Well, this guy invented the QR code, and he came out there and explained all this, and everybody's like, yeah, maybe camera phones weren't a big thing then. But he's like, this will change everything. You can have all this all this data and this cluster. And it's just an image. Think of the possibilities. We're now just in that, like in the last year and a half, it's everywhere now.
Everything.
It's part of everything. Everybody has a QR code. And that took 20 years for it to really finally get adoption. And I think comes back into that standards thing. I think VR and AR right now is still in their technology jump leap right now to get the technology to where companies can now invest, our individuals and startups can invest in trying to become a thing. But we're also supercharged because we have the internet and everything else compared to what they took from that. So yeah, I think that anybody that's tying themselves to that and not just trying to hype the tech, but actually building utility out of it, it's going to change a lot of things. And that's why I like foam and those kind of things that allow you to take your existing hardware and create some kind of other layer to it. I mean, it changes things. It also incentivizes people to make nodes, and nodes are where they're the card catalog of the blockchain, right? So, the more node, that's why you always hear people like put a node online, try to invest and put a node. And it all comes back down to like making sure that node isn't saturating your internet connection, right? Setting it up appropriately. I've watched 5 tutorials just to see, because we were looking at doing one, like very crawl, walk, run on like a Raspberry Pi and showing somebody how to set up a node. And a lot of it comes down to like, if you put one online right now, and let's say you have Charter, you have 20 meg up, and you have 400 meg down, that node will use that 20 meg up. Like it will just untethered, it will just be like, why can't I do anything on the internet? And it's because your node is just serving, 20 meg constant. So you need to go in there and you need to change it where the max node speed is like 3 meg, like tailor it. But then you can start adding in those other services to provide. to help that experience. But again, it comes back to, are those incentivized? I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of new ways for people to earn passive income from this space, not just have to invest into a token, but actually take a piece of hardware, participate decentrally, and then for your participation. I think we're in the process. We got that with the storage stuff right now. We have an actual hard drive space with Storage J. You can download Storage J on your Windows computer. Literally go to Storage J's website and say, I got this extra 2 terabyte hard drive, and I'm going to allocate to that. And then now, again, you set no more than 2 meg upload, because otherwise it'll saturate your internet connection. And now you got all this like hashed information on your hard drive,
Right.
And you're getting paid in storage, you guys.
Yeah, you can see like companies that maybe are open 9 to 5, and there's 100 employees, but after 5, nothing's going on.
Yeah.
So now they can dedicate their internet, 100% of it, from
As reserve.
6 p.m. to 7 in the morning. So I guess, yeah.
And then that was the kind of concept of like EOS originally, was that you separated the 3 core things of a chain: the storage, the compute, and then the memory. So things that storage is like the shelf space in a library. Your memory is your desktop space, what you can have open, right? That's how many tables you have in the library. Your compute's the librarian going to grab them, right? So a lot of those are the 3 core resources of anything, any chain. If like Ethereum does that all through charging the gas fee for those operations, right? So if you're doing something quote unquote compute heavy, the EVM has to go run through a smart contract and do 10 things. Send people out. It's happening. That's the business logic, and it's the compute side. It costs money to do that. The memory space and storage kind of mix the same, but Ethereum is like 3 databases. Bitcoin's 1, right? It's got your transaction data set. Ethereum has like state and where data is held. It's blob, and then it's got referential key data of like the other. Like the transaction history. So, and that's why you're paying all that fee whenever you put a complex transaction together. So.
Yeah, we have about 18 minutes, but can you talk a little bit about anything in legislation, infrastructure bill, anything with crypto?
Well, I think they're on recess, right? So I think there's enough momentum in the space, and there's representation, right? That is bringing awareness to not disrupt anything. It's actually pretty, and maybe it's just the time of the sign of the turn of the times right now in the space of like before somebody like Janet Yellen coming out and saying we're going to tax untaxable gains type of thing would freak out, the market would collapse. I think it's like people are just cool story, like. It's not affecting things the way it used to. Like that kind of comment would have created, a massive thing. And I think what it comes down to is people realize, and they're seeing it, that like when the SEC goes after somebody, they went after XRP. Nobody's heard anything. Because they're going to come out and they don't want to lose that battle. They don't like taking losses, so they're going to settle and it'll be out. So I think the momentum's in the right way. I'm not honestly worried about what the U.S. government's going to do and change to it, because I think there's enough momentum that shift from China to here on the mining standpoint. As an example, Governor Abbott in Texas, Wyoming, our own dealings here, dealing with like Ameren here in Illinois. I'm dealing with Southwestern Electric right now, and just the motivation of like, yeah, we can match current rates. Just there's this kind of like new world momentum that's people want to be involved in it. They're understanding it more. I think that's going to resonate up top, and they're going to be like, we can be an innovator and a world leader in this space. We should lean into it, not disrupt it. The telemetry side, so I have a Chainalysis reactor certification, which just means I went through the due diligence to understand what the telemetry is on chains, right? Like how can you track, how can you trace, how can you look at stuff? I think the understanding is finally getting there to where it isn't about trying to put old world rules around this. nothing's changed. And like if you have crypto, you get a lot of crypto, and you go to do anything with that crypto, nothing changes on the fact that you need a title for that awesome car you're gonna buy, or your house. All those things that interact with the real world still are there. And now I'm also doing it on a medium that's super transparent on what it's doing. Even if it's Monero, if it's X, if it's a T address on Zcash, it's still going to hit some kind of exchange point where somebody else is either going to inherit that value because I'm trading for a service or not good, and it's going to be accounted for at some point. And if it isn't accounted for, then it's just going to have this audit point, right, where it's going to come up. So nothing changes in their world from if it's marshals, if it's local law enforcement, any of that, none of it changes at the end of the day for them. It just happens that that medium's a little different and it's newer, but you're still going to have that trace of why that person has what they have if they feel like it wasn't reported correctly and they paid the correct tax on it. It still will catch up, and it's not going anywhere. It's not like the legacy old system where said company doesn't keep the database, for 6 years, and then it's like, oh well, PayPal or that eBay transaction I never paid tax on. eBay only keeps their things for 4 years, so nobody knew, right? But this is a different world. So I think that as they understand that identification, it'll move from enforcement. So why don't we do some of this and start reducing some overhead here? Because the way the governments and legislation really work is they want us to comply with stuff, but they're also under their own budget constraints, and they're trying to figure out ways to reduce, because they're going to have less, unless they keep printing. So I mean, I think that it pays them more to lean into the technology than to push it away, because it's going to optimize certain things that they do. And I think that
industry the past 20 years, they couldn't stop, Napster and all those other things, so they had to adjust
Embrace
or
it.
die. And now everything's streaming and everybody's getting their cut.
Well, yeah,
it looks a lot different, but
well, I mean, if you look at, the generation that grew up through all that, right? I mean, like we all had LimeWire and Napster and Pirate Bay for movies and Popcorn Time and all those things that at the end of the day, it wasn't there's a few majority. It's like with anything. If you look at any kind of bell, curve, is like you're gonna have folks that are just, I don't care, burn the world, and then you're gonna have people that like, I really don't want to do this, but it's the only way I can do it, right? So somewhere in the middle is most folks are just like, I just want access to like decent speed to things. I will pay my fair share. Like that is like majority, right? Luckily, otherwise we'd have a lot more violent drama out there going on. But I think what happens is that they're going to see that some of that overhead makes more sense to not be spent on going after stuff more than like maybe it's an innovation budget, not a tax, right? And that innovation is going to cause things to be less use. Our number one issue right now, I think, is just public perception of it, and is it telemetry? Like we look at the Real ID stuff. I just saw it from Florida and Utah. On their Real ID, which is going to be all digital, right? You don't even have to carry like a license to be on your phone. They have this thing called social credit score as one of those things, where like when you look at the filling out of that, it's like all of your social online, like who are you online? And I'm like, well, that's going to be a little intrusive. Like sometimes you're trolling to troll, like whatever. So it's like creates this.
Trolls be trolling.
Well, the trolls be trolling. But it is that divorce of like people act differently when they're anonymous, when they're not anonymous. So do they do it in public or not, right? And then is that a narrative push to try to push everybody to just try to be real type of thing? I don't know, but it's some of that tech could be innovative on a chain to where we now have our ID with a like a crypto wallet that's a multi-wallet, right? And you have all those kind of as one thing. And then it gives you a lot more access to everything, a lot smoother taxes. Everything could be a lot more streamlined, right? If they lean into it, especially on the tax structure side. Like,
well, to follow up on both those last questions, so I've seen a couple of those growth things too, where it took 40 years for everybody to get developed and working. Do you see a timeline in your head as to when we see policies and standards and regulations coming out of the government?
I think in the next 3 years, and it isn't going to be because they can move fast. I think it's because they're going to be forced to just accept certain things.
And the beginning of all of this began when in your head?
The first time, I'll tell you, I was at the North American Bitcoin Conference in 2014. It was the first time that I saw, there's a group that the government usually brings in. So when the government's doing research, they bring in something called an FFRDC, which is a federally funded research and development.
Right.
So MITRE was at that conference. So they were discovering at that time. And so then the MITRE builds an awesome report to the government and sends that up and says, okay, here's what we think it is. And then they'll open up projects under, like, if it's defense, it'll be like under AFWorks or DARPA. If it's, you know, just Fed Civ, it'll be under each of the sub companies. Or
so as a follow-on, I went to transportation to help commercialize the space launch industry. It took us 6 to 9 months to take the policies that NASA and the DoD had written for doing it safely within the government and transition that over to the commercial world. But then it took another 15 years and some guys with billions to throw out the door to actually go off and do that. With all the monies that have been going in, and we're talking trillions now, to the crypto world, do you not see the government taking the existing SEC policy regulation standards and adapting them?
I think they're going to be forced to make new. They can't rely on stuff from the 40s and 50s of old policy.
Some of it will go right out the window.
Yeah, it's just not applicable, and it's taken more of it's taken an approach of, and we're already seeing that, like on the procurement side with like the transport side for SpaceX. They're now very agile with everything, right? It's not like you have to go blueprint all this stuff. It's like, let us fail often and early and get to a solution that then we will submit to your policy thing. And
it was a little adjustment. They got off of a federal facility, bought their own, and a lot of the rules went right out the window.
Yeah, because you don't need it. It's when you submit it. At the end of the day, it's when you submit it, right? So I think the SEC, the FINRA, CFTC, which was a lot more forward and progressive, was, CFTC was involved in early 2016, right? Trying to figure out how they could fit in that. FINRA, OCC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, all of those groups, also being pretty forward, and what I would argue kicked off the bull run last year when the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency came out and said, hey, we wanted to make sure banks have a fair shot at this, they can update their charters. That happened in October of last year.
Right.
And the second that memo, everybody's like, why did crypto blow way past all-time high? Literally, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which sets the guidance for banks, came out and said, we want banks to be able to participate.
Well, actually, they're credit unions only, but close enough.
But it's enough to let them, like, oh, okay, does that mean now the government's giving them the ability to update their charters?
Right.
Now, there's all kinds, there's FDIC, there's FINRA, from a compliance standpoint, that have to get in line, and that's why the current administration was like, whoa, pump the brakes, like, you guys are moving fast. We need FINRA, we need all of you guys to be aligned, at least from a direction standpoint. Otherwise, we're going to have banks with charters and creating crypto wallets, and FDIC doesn't know if it's insured or not, right?
So that's where the basis of the question was, that's where I see going on too. I agree with you. And I think those other agencies are doing the same exact thing that I did 40 years ago for commercial space. They're all looking at each other's draft and saying, okay, we need this, we need that. That's 50 years old, get it the hell out of here. And within the next couple of years, the gavel will come down and we'll all see flushing, if I might, of some of the companies and don't want to comply, whatever, operate offshore. Others that say, hey, cloud is here. I got to operate here.
So it's I think you're going to find that, and we got that mixed also with, over the next few years, a change of, there's a really cool graphic, and I'll see if I can retweet it, I saw, and it's essentially all the sitting members of Congress and ages and when's the likelihood of a transition, just by attrition. And in the next 5 to 6 years, it's significant. So we could see an entirely different Congress in the next 5 to 7 years, and
not saying the younger generation is going to change, but we grew up in like a click loop land standpoint. We played video games. We did things that were like fast and electronic and don't like old processes. So I think we're going to see that transition where that's the push to move. And we're seeing it. We didn't think on certain like software development and data center development and stuff that was taking years, and just like literally over like a year period. We've got a person that could drive change in there, and now you got everything agile and almost all those aspects.
And look at El Salvador. Their politicians, the average age is like 39, and they're not having problems expressing this right through. They set up a Bitcoin mining facility powered by a volcano in 30 days.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Well, look at healthcare. Centene spent billions doing that stupid data share.
Mm-hmm.
They had the lobby, they had the government change HIPAA laws to allow it, and they still can't get it to work. And that's not even blockchain based where, hey, you want my medical
you own the
records.
baseline.
Sure, I'll send it to you. It's like up in their cloud, and they still can't get it pulled off, and that's Centene giant.
Yeah, well, a lot of that's also
Billions
data
of dollars.
architecture, like trying to get part of this is the eloquence that I love about crypto, of the way we could change the way the system works, is interface agreements and IACs and all that kind of stuff between companies and processes are always like a sticking point, because nobody has their database set the same way. Everybody sets up Oracle differently. Like there's all these kind of like, we do these processes on both sides, of like ETLs or extract, transform, and loads. Like, okay, you've given it to me this way, but I got to change it this way from my view. Like crypto and just the framework, ERC 20, ERC 721, ERC 1155, like these standards allows all just to have this all common view, and now we're architecting to this single view, and it just streamlines all kinds of things that normally are hard. Like, I don't have to concern about this. I don't have to run, like, even trying to explain to leadership. And like 2 years ago, I went and I explained it to government leadership, just this kind of thing, just explaining, like, just ask questions. And I was able to kind of go through from a framework standpoint. And it's like, well, what if we were to make a change to the way the node, and I'm like, nah, you can make a proposal, but then it has to get accepted by the network. And it's like the whole concept of centralization versus decentralization. And like what you gain is that you have it decentralized, everybody subscribes to the same thing. And now you have a baseline pipeline that you can send information to. Now you create your smart contract and agree of, like, when you produce it, and if you're the producer of that, then everybody has to subscribe to that same data input to make it work. So now you're effectively getting your I was using Terraform as an example, your playbook for that is all broadcasted, and now everybody subscribes to that same thing. So now you can create all these pipeline services that are the same, and now you can get that same output, versus trying to figure out like the way you structure it. And most of those kind of things that impact, especially like HIPAA, are all down to who has access, when they have access, and does it go away. And it's like a slice of data. It's views on top of all this medical data.
Well, that's what Accenture does.
Yeah.
$1 trillion company for that reason alone.
Yeah, they did. BBM, business process modeling. It's
here's a CSV. It has to look like this, or else it's not the same.
Yeah, but the problem is most people come out, and especially third-party contractors, come out with an idea. I mean, I've been one of those people, unfortunately. Let's say, here, if you wanted to change the world, here's what you have to do. Now it's just getting that convinced everybody. And the inverse is not one person trying to convince a company, one company, that then has to convince other companies. It's just like, why don't we all just go to this blockchain that all has the framework, and now we're all subscribing to it. So now it's already done, versus having to create something new. And that's, again, another equalizer where you have this, it's the same.
Do you think they'll try to conform to the current change, or just create their own? Because I don't see it happening. You can't store that much data that my health records subscribe get transferred. Maybe you could have a wallet that stores it, but it would have to be on their own chain, right?
Correct. It would be more from, you store it in whatever way you want to store it. The difference that you put on the chain is on the retrieval of what I need, and then you would have to have that translator that would go fetch it. So you would have everybody subscribing to a chain. Think of it like a pipeline, like a roadway. And you're in a car yelling off to the side saying, I need the data this way, and you submit to it, and then your key pair says that you're privileged because in the system, that public key matches to some identity record, right?
Let's say Elon Musk's health data is on a chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he sends it one time. Do we know his wallet address? And now we know that's Elon Musk's health data sitting there. And
You
that
could
way
create.
everything is?
You would create a key pair with like a PGP key to guarantee that that's him, and then he would have to sign it in some way.
Yeah, but
to unlock
could
it.
someone else ever theoretically figure out that's his wallet? His data's in that wallet. Monitor where he sends it.
It would just be the reference key. So it's just like, think of it like all the blockchain would be is the card catalog. No data. It's just a card catalog. His medical data is in that book that's on that shelf. But I can't take that card catalog and walk over and say, I need access to this, here's my ID.
Without his signature.
Without his
Or
signature.
you could monitor where he sends it theoretically.
You would be monitoring that walk
Yeah.
over to that librarian to say,
Yeah.
I need access to this. And that's the difference between like current data structures are, I have access to the library, and once I'm in that library, all the books are mine.
Yeah.
Right? And depending on privilege access, maybe I can't get to the second floor, but I definitely can get to that first floor of that library. Where in the chain, if it's done right, the chain is the card catalog, only the card catalog. You don't want to store tons of data on the chain, but you want all that reference data and your access to be able to open that drawer and pull that card out and say, I need access to this, and you're walking over. Essentially, the librarian in that case is a broadcast to the chain that you have access. And you would show your ID plus this, and then that key pair then would make a new hash to say, yep, those two together are good. And
Secret
now you have
reference.
access to just one book. That's the other thing, is like, I grabbed one card, I have one book, where you're not given access to the whole honeypot, because each data key is stored unique to that book, which TED has all that information. It's a completely revolution of the way we access data. This is what they've tried to do from zero, what is it? Like zero proof knowledge and single access to single bits of data. So like there's this whole concept of like identity domains, information domains, so their IDs, and then the self-sovereign access to data, where you can get to one piece of what you need. But then if you want to access something else, you may have access to all kinds of data, but you have to make separate requests every time and re-authenticate. So it's zero knowledge trust, essentially. It's zero knowledge proofs and trust to a single piece of data.
Theoretically, I wouldn't pay to have my health information sent to my doctor. I'm not paying a gas fee to send me benefits.
Well, see, in that case, you'd want to have that on layer 2. That's part of the reason why there's not a huge adoption to have everything on layer 1.
Yeah.
Because just in that case, let's say even if they did one state, New York State tried to do this, same thing. They tried to have just a payment network on chain, and IBM modeled it for them, and it was they did it in the Linux output. I can't even think of it because I discard information I don't care about. Hyperledger, got it. So they did it in Hyperledger first, and then they're like, oh, well, we could do this in Ethereum too. Well, just modeling, and it was just the orchestration of when somebody would go to a doctor appointment, it would be the payment orchestration off of the invoice of who needed to get paid, and it would happen automatically on chain. To where everybody would be automatically paid. There was none of this like 30-day delay. Did you do this or that, whatever record? There was a whole secondary process to it to create a accrual, like if you got overpaid or whatever. But it was all going to be done on chain, and it was all done based on your medical card ID and the fact that you went to a doctor's thing. And they modeled it with wallets and all. And then what they found was like in that benchmarking, doing it on like a test net, is like if they did it for the whole state of New York, it would completely saturate all of Ethereum. And this is before even NFTs and stuff. This was like 2018. And their model that they did on it was like, yeah, layer 1's never going to work. I mean, we can't even get one state. It would completely lock up Ethereum.
If you were going to create 100 million NFTs in the next month, what chain would you do it on?
100 million.
Yeah, we'll get 10 million.
Probably.
10 million. Awesome.
Well, probably the smoothest user experience would be on Solana.
I would even agree with that.
Huh?
I would agree with that, and I'm a
Yeah.
big Solana hater.
Do you
But I'd
think
still agree with you.
fees at that high volume, do you think you project your gas fees
Just
on
because it's not
Solana at
saturated.
that volume, like over, let's say 6 months?
And because of, like you said, user interface. Because they have
I'd say
and smart
4 months
contracts
ago you
integrated fully.
couldn't. Now that they had that DDoS attack and we had 400,000 transactions going and a single day that took it down, gas fees I think get like $2.
Yeah,
And that was at its full thread.
Yeah.
So you can project it now based on if you had that kind of load. But well, I mean, most of these things are now they all stage the load over time, so you don't drop everything at once. You just kind of release over a period of time, like a batch, and you submit it posts. Okay, do the next one.
There's the clearinghouse, right?
Yeah,
You just batch them all together and do one run versus. If I want to create, 100,000 a day, would I batch it all on my own and then run it at once, or would I just keep hitting Solana Network every time I want one minted?
Yeah, it'd pay you to slow roll it, to not have to pay the fees.
Yep.
And then you could figure out, like, if I do this all at one time.
It's hard to script on Solana's script though. I don't know a way to delay. Especially if you wanted to knit 1 second an automated script did. I haven't been able to figure that out.
Well, yeah, you just bring it up a layer. So bring it up to where you're building essentially where you pre-script it, and then you would just release it through something like you throw it in Node.js with React front end, and just create a front end that just says each of these are bundles. Define your bundle set, and then store all your bundles in Node, and then just dump them over a period of time to interact with Phantom wallet.
Is there a consultation for hire?
Yeah, it actually is.
Hey guys, I know you guys have a lot of questions. He'll be back Thursday for our Bitcoin over beer. It's here, right?
It's behind you. I wrote it down on the board. Yeah, Bitcoin over beer here. Sponsored by Beer Sauce. Yep, Michael Carter will be back. Episode 3830.
So come by and chat with him.
Yeah, and if you or anybody wants to come back, look us up on Eventbrite, or I can actually give you my card and I can email it to you guys.
If you're going to come, you probably want to register so we know how many people show up, because it's not a large space here. So we might cap it at 50 people. But aside of next week, I know we have somebody talking, the Z Brothers talking about de-Googlifying your phone and fair day cases and things like that for security. So we'll have a talk next week. But you guys can stay as long as you want.
Tuesday.
I'm sorry?
Was that for Tuesday?
Every Tuesday, yeah.
Are you listening to these on the Facebook, like the subjects?
We're going to start doing
We're going to, but the problem is I don't want to get too many people, because we get enough crowd for so we're kind of just testing it out to see how it goes. But if you guys have more questions, just reach out to me or Jonas. Just let us know.
Jeff, just clarification, the de-Googlifying is next Tuesday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have the Z Brothers coming. Those guys. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that Ethereum hit all-time highs while you were talking.
Oh yeah. Well, he's live streaming.
No, I'm not live.
You have a question?
What's his name?
Carter, Michael Carter.
Michael.
I got the YouTube and Twitter up there on the board.
BitsBeTrippin.
Yeah.
You can. We'll give you our email. We ordered cards.
Yeah. But yeah, you guys are more than welcome to stick around. But we got a short meeting here, so. But thank you all for coming in, and just reach out to Carter if you have any other questions for him.